When I first joined the company, I thought it would just be another job. Something steady, safe, and far from the chaos of my last workplace. I was 28, determined to build a career I could be proud of, and the offer letter had felt like a promise of something better. The office was bright and modern, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper, but it was her presence that filled the space, my boss. She was 40, confident in a way that made the air around her feel charged. Everything about her was precise. The way she walked, the way she spoke, the way she seemed to notice the smallest things without ever letting on. Her dark hair was always perfectly pinned back, her tailored suits crisp and clean. The first time she looked at me, it was only for a second, but it felt like she was measuring me, weighing me against something invisible. The first few days were tense. She wasn't cruel, but she had a way of speaking that left no room for excuses. Her voice was calm but edged with steel, and every instruction felt like both a challenge and a test. I found myself straightening my posture when she entered the room, carefully choosing my words when I answered her. She never smiled at me in those early days, though her eyes sometimes lingered a fraction longer than necessary. Once, I caught her watching me from across the conference table while someone else was speaking. It wasn't the kind of stare that made you uncomfortable, it was more like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. But the moment I met her gaze, she looked away, returning to her notes as if nothing had happened. Another time, when I was arranging files on her desk, our hands brushed. It was such a small thing, accidental, yet I thought I saw her inhale sharply before pulling her hand back. I couldn't tell if she liked me or if she was simply assessing me as part of her job. But I felt something, a current under the surface, a silent awareness between us that neither of us acknowledged. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, she was my boss, and I was here to work, not to wonder why my heart seemed to race when I heard her heels clicking down the hallway toward my desk. Still, there were moments that stuck with me. The way she stood a little closer than necessary when pointing out something on my computer screen. The way her voice softened for just a second when she said my name. And sometimes when she passed by my desk, her eyes would meet mine for the briefest instant, holding something I couldn't quite name before slipping back behind that careful, composed mask. I didn't know it then, but those first days were the beginning of something I couldn't have predicted. A quiet shift that would pull me into a story I was never expecting to live. It was a Tuesday when she came. The morning had been slow, the kind where the sound of keyboards and the hum of the air conditioning made the office feel half asleep. I was buried in reports when I heard a lighter, quicker set of footsteps in the hallway. Not the deliberate click of my boss's heels, but something softer, lighter, almost playful. I glanced up, and there she was. A younger woman, maybe mid-20s, stood beside my boss's office door. She had the same dark hair, but hers fell in loose waves over her shoulders. Her skin seemed to catch the light in a way that made her look like she'd just stepped out of some quiet, sunlit place. She smiled when her eyes met mine. A warm, open smile that felt entirely different from the polite, guarded expressions I was used to in this building. "This is my sister," my boss said casually when she noticed me looking. Her tone was even, but there was something softer in her voice than I'd ever heard before. I managed a small hello, and the sister nodded in return, her smile deepening just enough to feel personal. I went back to my desk, but it was impossible to ignore her presence. She didn't behave like a visitor here for a quick chat. She lingered. I caught her walking slowly past my desk more than once, her eyes flicking toward me before she looked away. It wasn't the kind of stare people give out of boredom, it was sharper, more deliberate, like she was cataloging something about me. Once, as I was stapling a stack of documents, I felt her gaze so strongly that I glanced up. She was leaning casually against the reception counter across the room, head tilted slightly, a faint smile playing on her lips. She didn't look away immediately. She let the moment stretch, as if testing how long I'd hold her gaze. My stomach gave a small, inexplicable twist. Later, I passed by my boss's office to drop off some files. The door was half open, and I could hear the low murmur of their voices. At first, it was the easy tone of two people catching up, but then there was a pause. The kind of pause that made you aware you weren't supposed to be listening. I heard my name. Just once, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. When I stepped inside, my boss's eyes flicked to mine, unreadable. Her sister, however, smiled again, that same warm, knowing smile, and stood up to leave. As she passed me, Her hand brushed lightly against my arm, whether by accident or intention I couldn't tell. The rest of the day, I found myself catching fragments: the sister's reflection in the glass when she walked by, the way she tilted her head when she thought I wasn't looking, the quick glances she exchanged with my boss. Every time I looked up, it seemed her eyes found me first. By the time I left the office, the light outside had shifted into that soft, golden hour glow. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just casual friendliness, but something about the way she'd looked at me all day made it hard to believe that. I walked to my car with a strange tightness in my chest, not discomfort exactly, but something far more complicated. I had no idea why her attention unsettled me so much, or why I couldn't stop thinking about it. The week that followed was heavier than most. Deadlines piled up, small mistakes multiplied, and my boss seemed to be in every corner of the office at once, checking, directing, correcting. I pushed myself harder than I should have, partly to prove I could keep up, partly because I didn't want to see even a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. By Friday evening, the air in the office felt still and tired. One by one, my colleagues packed their bags and drifted toward the elevator, their chatter fading down the hall. I stayed behind, hunched over my desk, trying to finish one last report before I let myself go home. The screen blurred slightly if I stared too long, and the words on the page felt heavier than my hands. Somewhere between one paragraph and the next, my head grew too heavy to hold up. I rested my cheek on the cool surface of the desk, telling myself it would just be for a minute. The hum of the air conditioning became a lullaby, the soft ticking of the clock a slow drumbeat. My eyes closed before I could stop them. I don't know how long I was out before I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me, slower, quieter than usual. The subtle scent of her perfume reached me before I opened my eyes. When I finally stirred, I saw her standing there, just a few feet away, watching me. Not with the sharp, assessing gaze she usually wore in the office, but something softer, almost careful. For a moment, she didn't say anything, as if she were deciding whether to wake me at all. Her voice, when it came, was gentle. "Olivia," she said, my name rolling off her tongue in a way I hadn't heard before. "You should go home." I blinked, trying to shake the sleep from my eyes. "Sorry. I must have." "It's fine," she cut in, her tone almost kind. "You've been working hard." She glanced toward the empty office around us. "Let me drop you home. It's late." Normally, I would have protested. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the offer, it just felt too personal, too close. But in that moment, still wrapped in the haze of sleep, I didn't have the energy to argue. I nodded, gathering my things slowly. She didn't rush me. Instead, she stood by the door, hands loosely clasped, watching as I slipped my bag over my shoulder. There was no trace of the strict boss in her posture now, no sharp edges, no clipped tone. Just a quiet, steady presence that somehow made me feel less like an employee and more like someone she cared about. We stepped into the cool night air together, the city's noise a low hum in the distance. As she unlocked her car and held the door open for me, I caught her looking at me again. Not in the way her sister had, all bold curiosity, but in a way that made me feel like I might not have to carry everything alone. I slid into the seat, still too tired to think much about it. I only knew that I didn't mind her taking me home. Not tonight. The ride started quietly. The hum of the engine and the faint sound of the radio filled the silence between us. I leaned my head back against the seat, letting the cool night air from the half-open window brush against my face. Streetlights passed in a slow rhythm, and for a while, I didn't think about anything at all. It was only after a few turns that I realized we weren't heading in the direction of my apartment. I frowned slightly, straightening in my seat. "This isn't the way to my place," I said, glancing at her. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road. "I know," she said simply, no explanation offered. I waited for her to elaborate, but she didn't. Instead, she took another turn, the streets growing quieter, lined with tall, leafy trees swaying in the breeze. A part of me wanted to ask again, but something in her calm expression told me I wouldn't get much more than I already had. A few minutes later, we pulled into the driveway of a large house. The porch light spilled a warm glow onto the stone path leading to the front door, and somewhere nearby, I could smell flowers, sweet and faint, like jasmine drifting in from an unseen garden. She cut the engine and glanced at me briefly. "Come inside. Just for a while." It wasn't really a request, but it wasn't an order either. I followed her up the steps, the sound of our footsteps soft against the stone. The door opened before she could even reach for the handle. Her sister stood there, framed in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, eyes lighting up the moment they landed on me. "Olivia," she said warmly, as if we'd known each other longer than those brief moments in the office. Her smile was just as open as before, but there was something else in it now, a quiet satisfaction, maybe even a hint of anticipation. She stepped aside to let us in, her hand brushing my arm as I passed. The touch was light, casual enough to be excused, yet deliberate enough that I felt the warmth linger on my skin. Inside, the air was soft and inviting, scented faintly with flowers I couldn't quite name. The lighting was low, golden, the kind that makes every corner feel like it's holding a secret. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, aware of both women watching me, one with the quiet, measured gaze I'd grown used to, and the other with a curiosity that felt almost tangible. Something told me I wasn't going home anytime soon. "You look exhausted," she said, studying me in a way that felt more personal than professional. "Why don't you rest for a bit before I take you home?" I hesitated, still standing near the entrance, but the quiet of the house and the soft scent in the air made the idea seem strangely inviting. "I don't want to be a bother." "You're not," she interrupted gently, and for the first time in weeks, her voice didn't carry any of that usual sharpness. "Come on." She turned and led me down a hallway lined with framed photographs. The lighting was low, golden, the kind that makes shadows seem softer than they really are. I followed her, my footsteps muffled against the thick carpet. She opened a door near the end of the hall and stepped aside to let me in. The room was warm and faintly perfumed, not the sterile scent of air freshener, but something softer, floral, almost like the perfume her sister wore. The bed was neatly made, covered in a pale cream quilt that looked impossibly soft. I glanced around, taking in the small personal touches, a few framed photographs on the dresser, her sister, smiling in the sun, hair windblown, a delicate porcelain jewelry box, a book lying open on the nightstand as if someone had been reading just before leaving. It was intimate. Too intimate to be a guest room. Something in my chest tightened. "This is..." I began. "She won't mind," she said quickly, almost too quickly, and there was the faintest flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Just lie down for a while." I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress sink slightly beneath me. She stood in the doorway for a moment, as if making sure I was comfortable, and then I saw her sister appear behind her. She leaned casually against the doorframe, her expression soft but difficult to read. Her gaze moved over me slowly, lingering just long enough to make my skin warm. There was no hurry in her movements, no awkwardness, just a calm, steady presence that felt both inviting and dangerous. "Get some rest," my boss said, and before I could respond, she closed the door halfway, leaving it open just enough for the warm light from the hallway to spill in. I lay back against the pillows. They smelled faintly of perfume, the same floral note I'd caught when her sister passed me earlier in the evening. My eyes roamed over the ceiling for a while, listening to the muffled sound of voices somewhere in the house, though I couldn't make out the words. Gradually, the weight of the week began to pull me under. My muscles loosened, the tension in my shoulders melting into the softness of the bed. Somewhere in that hazy space between waking and sleep, I thought I felt the faint vibration of footsteps in the hallway, the quiet shift of the door. But I was too far gone to open my eyes. For reasons I couldn't explain, I felt safe there. In a stranger's room, in a house that wasn't mine, with people I barely knew. Safe, and yet on the edge of something I couldn't quite name. I woke to the feeling of warmth beside me. It was subtle at first, the faintest shift in the mattress, the whisper of breath near my shoulder. My eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light spilling in from the hallway. The air in the room felt different now, heavier, as if it was holding its breath. I turned my head, and there she was. Her sister. She lay on her side, facing me, her dark hair falling loosely over the pillow, eyes soft and open in the low light. She didn't speak right away, just watched me as if waiting to see what I would do. "I didn't mean to wake you," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the sound of the night outside. "You looked so peaceful." My pulse quickened. "What are you doing here?" I asked, though my voice came out more curious than accusing. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't need to be seen to be felt. "Sometimes," she said, "it's nice not to be alone." Something in her tone caught me, not flirtatious, not teasing but honest. There was a rawness in it that made me forget the question I'd meant to ask next. "I know we don't really know each other," she continued, her eyes steady on mine, "but when I saw you at the office, I could tell. You know what it's like to feel unseen, even when people are looking right at you." Her words found a place in me I hadn't opened in a long time. I thought of the quiet evenings after work, the way I filled my days with tasks just to avoid the emptiness that waited at night. I thought of the way her gaze had lingered on me in the office, not just noticing me, but recognizing something in me. I didn't answer right away. My hand was resting on the quilt between us, and for a moment I thought she might reach for it. She didn't, but the space between our fingers felt electric. "It's not always easy," I said quietly, "letting someone see you." Her gaze softened even more. "No," she agreed. "But sometimes, the right person doesn't have to try. They just do." We lay there in silence for a while, the sound of our breathing filling the space between us. My initial nervousness hadn't gone away. If anything, it had deepened into something else, something I didn't want to name too quickly. But it was tangled with a pull I couldn't ignore. Her presence wasn't demanding, wasn't invasive. She didn't move closer, but she didn't move away either. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between us, a quiet acknowledgement that neither of us had expected tonight to end like this. I don't know how long we stayed like that before my eyes began to grow heavy again. The last thing I remember before drifting off was the faint sound of her breathing, steady and close, and the strange steady comfort of knowing she was there. The room was dim, only a thin slice of moonlight spilling across the bedspread. Olivia could hear the faint hum of the night outside, the whisper of leaves in the wind, a car passing somewhere far away. Beside her, the sister lay still, her presence a warm shape in the darkness. "Olivia." Her voice was quiet, but in the stillness it felt like it filled the room. Olivia turned slightly, her heart tightening at the sound of her name spoken that way, soft, careful, like it might break. "Yes." There was a pause, a shaky inhale. "I have to tell you something. I liked you from the very first moment we met." The sister's words were almost a confession and almost a release. I didn't say anything because it felt impossible. "My sister brought you here. You work for her." But still, her voice faltered. "I'd watch you smile and think, maybe you were the kind of person I could feel safe with." Olivia's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Not from the sister, not tonight. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, she heard it. A faint creak of the door. The boss stood there, half-shadowed, her hand resting against the doorframe. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, they carried something raw, something Olivia had never seen before. "You know," the boss said quietly, her voice steady but her gaze locked on Olivia, "I wasn't just being strict with you to keep things professional. I was being strict because," she hesitated, and for the first time, Olivia saw vulnerability break through that strong, composed mask. "Because I was trying to keep my distance from you. I was attracted to you from the moment you walked into my office." The words hit Olivia like a sudden rush of cold and heat at once. She sat up slowly, her gaze flicking between the two sisters, the one lying beside her, the one standing in the doorway. Neither looked away. The sister whispered, almost apologetically, "I didn't know she felt that way too." The boss's lips curved in a rueful smile, but there was sadness there. "I didn't plan to say anything. I thought it would be easier to let it fade. But hearing you say that to her," she shook her head slightly, "I couldn't just stand there." Olivia felt her heart thudding, her thoughts scattering. She hadn't imagined this, not in her wildest, strangest dreams, that both of them would feel this way about her. And yet, here it was, laid bare under the fragile light of the night. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, weighted with unsaid words, with the pull of emotions no one had the courage to name fully. "I don't know what to say," Olivia admitted, her voice trembling despite her best effort to keep it steady. "You don't have to say anything right now," the sister said gently. Just know how I feel. And know how I feel, the boss added, her tone quieter now, almost pleading. You've been in my thoughts more than I ever wanted to admit. Olivia's chest ached, not from pain, but from the enormity of it all. She wanted to reach for both of them, to hold them close, to understand how such a strange, tangled moment could also feel so strangely tender. No one moved for a long time. The only sound was the faint rhythm of breathing, the distant hum of the night. Finally, the boss stepped closer, her gaze softening as she looked between Olivia and her sister. I don't want to make you choose tonight, she said. That wouldn't be fair. I just wanted you to know the truth. Olivia swallowed hard. And now I do. The sister's hand brushed against Olivia's under the blanket, warm and trembling. The boss lingered at the edge of the bed, her presence steady but charged. They stayed like that, three people caught between truth and choice, until the night grew heavy and silence became the safest language. In the morning, the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the house. Olivia stood at the doorway, bag slung over her shoulder, her heart heavier and fuller than it had ever been. The boss was in the kitchen, her expression calm but her eyes watching closely. The sister stood beside her, a soft, almost shy smile on her lips. No one said goodbye in a grand way. No declarations, no promises, just a lingering glance, a faint touch of fingers, a quiet awareness that something had changed forever. Olivia stepped out into the morning air, the cool breeze brushing against her skin. She didn't know what the future would bring, only that her heart now carried two truths, both impossible to ignore. And as she walked away, she realized she wasn't just uncertain. She was alive in a way she hadn't felt in years.